Welcome back to the channel. This game is one of the first games Nigel played in the Chess Olympiad in 1984 in Greece. This was the round three game against Italy. Nigel was playing second reserve, even though he was British champion due to the strength of the English team at the time, which was Miles, Nunn, Spillman, and Chandler, I think. So Nigel, being quite inexperienced, was actually second reserve. As I say, this is the third round game against the Italian FM Giacomo Vallifuoco. Apologies for pronunciation. The game started as a Sicilian defence. Nigel chooses to Fianchetto is bishop on g2. All normal stuff. Well, queen comes to c7, he's kicked on the knight. The knight will end up on ace3 at some point. And this is a well-known variation in Scheveningen. English Scheveningen. And here, white is like quite a comfortable position. I think f4 is going to come soon and put pressure on the black centre, whereas white will try to pressurise the e pawn in the centre. And sure enough, Nigel starts the kingside advance. And this just overprotects the e pawn. Black, maybe a bit ambitiously, decides to counter thrust on the kingside with h4, h5, h4. So Nigel immediately attacks the h pawn, which actually has to advance and may become a weakness later, or would have to swap itself off and open up the h file against the black king. Just protecting the knight, and sure enough, the h file becomes open for white. And white doubles the rooks, putting pressure on the d pawn. And this is quite a nice position for white. He's got much more space. His pieces are quite nicely active. There's pressure on the d file, and also he's got the open h file to work with in due course. So black has to try and work out which is the best way to defend the d pawn. I mean, an option is knight takes e4 with this standard trick of forking on d5 in the end, which would be playable, but again, I think white's still got a nice position, and maybe after f5, kicking the knight. Back to f8, and maybe f5 and f6 would cause some trouble. So black decides to play d5, which leads to a lot of trades on the d5 square. And when all said and done, White's still in a very nice position, and the next move is a nice position to put even more pressure on the d pawn, which is queen to f3, pinning the pawn against the queen on b7. So black has to defend the pawn with rook to d8, and now there's quite a lot of pressure on black. He's got the isolated d pawn now, which is going to become a target. Nigel decides to attack it straight away with knight to e3. Potentially f5 would have been better, kicking the knight first and then playing knight to e3, where black would have to probably give up that pawn, and white would have been in a very nice position. A pawn up and still with all his pieces nice and active. I mean, there's nothing wrong with knight to e3. I think just f5 was a better, well, another option. So white duly wins the pawn, and black decides to swap off the bishops, which I think only helps white in the long run, just because it's another defender that black hasn't got, and also gets the king off the back rank, allowing the rook to swing to h1 at some points with a bit of tempo. But also now the main threat white's got now is obviously knight to f6, check, winning the queen. So the queen's either got to be defended or moved. And black decides to defend with the rook, which I think is a bit of a mistake. I think queen to c8 would have been a better option, just to get the queen off the line. Nigel plays c4, protecting the knight and pushing the pawn, but he had a better move in queen to e4, which I think would have probably won the game straight away. The idea is threatening quite a number of moves. White decides to try and play queen to c6. I think the main idea would have been something along the lines of f5, e8, and then obviously white can win the exchange and put pressure on the knight. And this would be very pleasant for white and probably winning. Black would be tied to the defence of the knight, and white's an exchange up. Then back to the queen to e4 move. Obviously f5 is the move that's coming, followed by knight to e7 check. I think that's the main threat. So black has to deal with that. He could try a king to f8, but I don't think that really works due to queen to b4 check. And then f5, kicking the knight, and knight to e7, and mate would follow. So queen to e4 would have been a very nice move for Nigel, and probably won the game on the spot. But he plays c to c4, just sort of shoring up everything. He's still got a very nice position, and black's really quite helpless. He plays a5, which is a bit of a nothing move. But what else can he play? Queen to h5, and now you can see the problem with the h file being open. Rook to h1's come in, and there isn't any real defence for black. f6 to avoid the mate, and then rook to e1's coming back to threaten knight e7 check, winning. g6 the only move, but it allows Nigel to take the pawn on f6, king comes forward, and then queen to e5. And at this point black resigned. White's got an overwhelming, crushing attack, and there's not much he can do about it. I mean, one variation would be maybe rook to d8 to get the rook off the attack of the queen. But knight to d5, and then queen to f6 check. So the king has to move, and then queen to g5 hitting the rook, and the knight to e7 check again. And knight to f6, and we'll pick up the rook and basically just be completely winning after the queen's come off, if the queen takes on d5. So a nice win for Nigel in his first Olympiad. against quite a lowly rated player. But always nice to get a win and quite a nice smooth game. I'll be back with another interesting game from the Olympiad in due course, where short plays Arthur Yusupov, who at the time was a highly rated Russian grandmaster, and yeah, it turned out to be a very interesting game. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the videos, and leave any comments or any suggestions or anything that would help me improve. Would be much appreciated. Until next time, bye for now. Thanks.